Hey guys, today we're playing with Red Raid. It's a modern deck that I made, and really what's special about this deck is that it's a winning modern deck for less than $20. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, some people like to throw like hundreds of dollars at a modern deck, and this is a perfect alternative for budget players who don't have that kind of money. And the object of the deck is to use cards like Cavalcade of Calamity and Raid Bombardment to fuel cards like Chandra's Spitfire and Wildfire Elemental to be able to deal a lot of damage to your opponent very quickly. Now let's take a closer look. Cavalcade of Calamity. It's a 2-cost red enchantment with whenever a creature you control with power 1 less attacks. Cavalcade of Calamity deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. And Raid Bombardment does the same thing, except it costs 3 mana and is power 2 or less. And now, they work really well with Chandra's Spitfire, and because it's a 1/3 with flying for 3, whenever an opponent is dealt non-combat damage, it gets +3/+0 until end of turn. So whenever we attack with a creature with power 1 or less, the Cavalcade hits them, and then Chandra's Spitfire triggers, giving +3/+0 until end of turn, and has flying, so it's not that easy to block. So it makes it deal 4 damage instead of 1. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot for this to get really powerful. We also use Wildfire Elemental. It's a 3/3 for 4. Whenever an opponent is dealt non-combat damage creature, you control +1/+0 until end of turn. Yeah, it does the same thing, except it spreads it out evenly over the creatures, turning everything into like 3/1s and stuff like that. Now, one thing that the deck needs is a lot of 1/1 creatures. So for that, we have 1 copy of Battle Mad Ronin. It's a 1/1 for 2 with Bushido 2. Whenever it blocks or becomes blocked, it's +2/+2 until end of turn, and attacks each turn if able. So basically, it helps you cheat out the 1 power rule, because it makes it sturdy in combat so that it can be blocked by like 2/2s and not die. And then we also Bloodmark Mentor. It's a 1/1 for 2. This is really the only expensive card in the deck. It's not even that expensive. It's a $2 card. Red creatures you control have first strike for 2 mana. That's really nice because we're going to be giving everything a bunch of power. Chandra's Pyreling. It's a 1/3 for 2. And it works a lot like the Spitfire and Wildfire Elemental, except it's not as fast. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, it gets +1/+0 and gains double strike until end of turn, which I mean is still good, but it's not going to deal damage as fast as Spitfire. And we run 4 copies of Fanatical Firebrand. It's one with haste, and you can tap and sack it. It deals 1 damage to target creature or player, so it can attack first turn. And then, once you don't need it anymore, you can sack it to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then that triggers non-combat damage. Kari Zev's Skyship Raider. We run 1 copy of this, and it's a 1/3 for 2 with first strike and menace. When it attacks, you get a legendary 2/1 red monkey creature token named Ragavan that's tapped and attacking. Exile that token at the end of combat. So yeah, it attacks for 3. It can also trigger Raid Bombardments a second time. So that's really nice. And Tilinali's Summoner. It's a 1/1 for 2 with Ascend. For those of you who aren't familiar with the mechanic, if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. The City's Blessing doesn't do anything on its own, but some cards are triggered by the City's Blessing, like this one. When it attacks, you may pay X and a red. If you do, create X 1/1 red elemental tokens that are tapped and attacking at the beginning of your next end step. Exile those tokens unless you have the City's Blessing. So yeah, we see it come into play here because you can let the tokens stack up until you have a lot of them, which normally doesn't happen in this deck. But yeah, it allows you to trigger, like if you have open mana that you're not going to use, you can just spend that and get, say, like 2 or 3 1/1s, and then that triggers like a few additional times. And moving on, we have 2 copies of Torbran, Thane of Red Fell. It's a 2/4 for 3 red and 1. And if a red source you control deal damage to an opponent or permanent and an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So since we run a lot of 1/1s, they're basically all just 3/1s. And raid bombardments hits for 3 now. So if you attack with 3 creatures, you're not even including the effects from non-combat damage, then that's 18 damage. That's a lot. And then, moving on, we have Spikefield Hazard. It counts as a land, because you can flip it over and it's a land on the other side. You can play it for either, and it's just tapped. But it deals 1 damage to any target. If a permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. So yeah, it can trigger non-combat damage. And then, for Blinding Flare, it costs 1, and as any number of target creatures can't block this turn, but it costs 1 more to cast for each creature you target. So it's basically pay X creatures can't block. If you're having trouble getting damage through, this can help, because it makes your opponent's creatures not able to block. And then we run a single copy of Insult to Injury. And Insult costs 3 and is a sorcery. Damage you control can't be prevented this turn. If a source you control deals damage this turn, it deals double instead. So if you don't quite have lethal, you can just play Insult, and then it'll make you have lethal. And then Injury, you can cast her Aftermath, which is basically just playing it from its graveyard once you've cast Insult. It deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player, which I don't really use a lot. I'd mostly just use it for the Insult, but it's still good. And then for lands, I already showed you Spikefield Hazard. And then we use 3 Dwarven Mines. It enters tapped unless you control 3 or more other mountains. When it enters untapped, you get a 1/1 red dwarf, so it helps you create more tokens. Yeah. And we run 18 mountains, because, yeah, you need lands. And then we also have a sideboard for this deck. And we have 3 more copies of Battle Mad Ronin. Normally you'd want to use the sideboard in case your opponent's playing some kind of like control deck maybe, and you might not need something like Blinding Flare, because they won't have any creatures to block with. And yeah, these cards are a good sideboard option in case that happens. You have 3 Battle Mad Ronin, 1 Kari Zev. We use Tumult Rakish Instigator. It's a War of Spark Planeswalker. It's a 3-cost red Planeswalker for 5. Your opponents can't gain life. It helps shut down life gain decks, in case you need that. And it has -2. Create a 1/1 red devil. With when this dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. So it can help trigger non-combat damage. And it can also trigger raid bombardments, which is nice. And then we use Aki Lava Runner, which I'm kind of debating taking out. It's a 4-cost 1/1 with haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, flip it. And when you flip it, it becomes a 2/2 Tok Volcano Born. Protection from red. If a red source would deal damage to a player, it deals that much to +1 instead. So we see like a Torbran effect here. It can help it move faster. I would really only recommend this if you expect the game to be more drawn out and not winning like 4th or 5th turn. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about this deck. So see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe.